All right, good evening, everyone. We're so excited to see all of your faces here tonight. This is our first Welcome Center parent program of the school year, and actually our first ever program. We're really excited because we have a couple of parent programs planned for this year. And my name is Alicia Hart. I'm the new student transition coordinator and also the person responsible for our Welcome Center. So I'm excited for us to be able to share some amazing information. We surveyed parents after parent-teacher conferences. I imagine many of you are people who responded to that survey. And the feedback told us that the highest interest of all of the topics that we put out there was managing stress and anxiety for your adolescents. And so that is why we've focused on that topic first, and we'll be looking at parent-teacher conferences as a topic in February. So more information to come on that. But as we look at supporting your students' social, emotional, academic needs, we know that there are both ETHS and resources within our community. And so we'll be partnering with both ETHS staff and community organizations as we structure our events in the coming year. With us this evening are panelists as well as ETHS administrators. And we're going to structure this first with an introduction from ETHS, then introductions from our panelists, some information, and then an opportunity for questions and answers. First, I want to say a huge thank you to the Family Institute and their staff for being present this evening. We really sincerely appreciate you volunteering your time here. And also for families who are not able to attend the discussion this evening, we will be actually webinaring this whole conversation, which is important to note for you who are here as participants to know that we are actually going to be sharing information. As you can see, it's all going to be just slides. It won't actually be anyone's faces. But we do want to note that because the audio will be recording. And so anything that's being shared through the audio will be shared on the web. So if you talk to a friend and said, oh, this was such a great program, you should have been there. Well, now you can actually tell them to refer to our website, and there will be a video available where they can hear the audio from today, which will be great for resources. Or if you thought, oh, I can't remember who it was who mentioned X information, you can always go back to the video yourselves. So first, before we get going, I'd like to ask Dr. Marcus Campbell, our Assistant Superintendent Principal, to kind of stand up and give you a little bit more of a welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Hart. As Allie mentioned, my name is Marcus Campbell. I'm the Assistant Superintendent and Principal here at Evanston Township High School. And I'm very delighted to see such a great crowd here tonight. This is our first of many parent education workshops for our families and for our parents. This one, of course, being entitled Managing Adolescent Stress and Anxiety. This topic is very important to us as a school, and I'm finally really happy that we are finding ways to really work with parents and partner with parents on this particular challenge that many youth deal with. And so I'm just thrilled that our panelists are here tonight. They are very accomplished and decorated in their own right. And so this is a very important step for us as a community to really recognize and support our students in more ways. I mean, we have a lot of mental health services here at ETHS, but this is just one more thing that we can do, work with families and parents like yourselves and addressing some of these issues. We're looking to destigmatize mental health here at ETHS, and this is part of that work. And we're going to hear from our associate principal of student services tonight, Ms. Taya Kinsey, around all of our efforts to support students' social emotional well-being. And so I'm going to get out of the way because I think we have a lot of great information to be able to cover and talk through tonight. So welcome to ETHS, and we look forward to doing more of these in the future. So, Ms. Kinsey, come on up.
So as you all can tell, we have a strong commitment to being able to support all of your students with regard to anxiety and stress and how we manage that and how that impacts your students' functioning in all areas, but specifically academic functioning. So we wanted to be able to talk a little bit tonight before our esteemed panel gets started with regard to what are some of the supports that we have in place at ETHS. You guys?
Yep.
Okay. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about was just that every student does have an ETHS student support team that follows the student, your child, for all 4 years at ETHS, your counselor, the dean, the social worker, and the psychologist. And with regard to the teaming, these teams comprise the kind of 3 pillars at ETHS with regard to academics, post-secondary planning, and social emotional well-being. The nurse's office, or our health services department, helps really attend to students' needs with regard to becoming ill during the day, but also thinking about maintenance. And one thing that I really respect about our health services department is that we really focus on the whole child. And that's true of each area where your child can get support. Is we think about all components of the student, not just health, but how that health may impact academics, or health may impact social emotional functioning. We are so fortunate to have the ETHS Health Center, which is, as you all may be aware, a fabulous collaborative between North Shore University Health System and the city of Evanston, and being able to be right here inside ETHS with comprehensive medical services, separate from the health services nurses. Our social workers and psychologists provide all kinds of supports. They provide walk-ins, they engage referrals from parents, from students, from teachers, and that's with regard to counseling. We have a lot of group supports, we have crisis intervention, and then of course we have our PE and wellness department. So when we're thinking about school-wide supports, our wellness class has really been increasingly developed to be that of one that focuses on your students' well-being with regard to stress management, with regard to nutrition and how that impacts them, with regard to drug and alcohol education. So that is an ongoing support. Our safety department is always working hard on making sure that this is a safe and secure building, and also developing relationships with students. And that's another area in which we don't just ensure students' physical well-being, but developing those relationships for the social emotional element. And then lastly, our nutrition services department really helps students with regard to the 3 cafeterias, freshmen having their own cafeteria, and making sure that students have the opportunity for a truly well-balanced meal. So with that said, we are going to be moving on to our next slide, and I think Ms. Hart is going to do some formal introductions. Thank you.
Ms. Kinsey may have mentioned, but we did have a brief handout with information about ETHS Student Services, and there's a small section for notes, just if you want to jot something down as you're listening today. Just wanted to mention that. So I'm going to ask Danielle Black to start with an introduction about herself, and then each of the panelists will introduce themselves as well. We have some extensive information that we'll put up here that you probably won't be able to see the full slide, but there are bios at the back if you'd like to grab a copy of that. So we'll start with you now.
Actually, I'm going to stand up. Is that okay with everybody? I feel kind of short sitting down, but I can't see your faces. So before I start actually introducing myself, I should probably introduce the Family Institute, which we are all from the Family Institute, which if you don't know of us, we've been in your backyard for a long time. So we're right on the campus of Northwestern University. We are a non-for-profit that provides mental health services for all of the family, for the health of the family. So this means individuals, couples, families, teens, adolescents, children. So we're part of Northwestern, but we are our own non-for-profit, which sounds like a strange relationship, but it works very well because we have our own board. But we are also confer degrees in Masters in Family Therapy and Masters in Counseling degrees. So many of us serve dual functions there, where we're teaching. For example, I'm on the grad faculty, teaching students to become master's level mental health professionals. So that's kind of the Family Institute. Myself, I'm the Director of Child and Adolescent and Family Service Line at the Family Institute. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology, and I specialize mostly in emotion dysregulation, particularly in anxiety. So that's probably why I was asked to do this, because it's sort of my bread and butter. But I basically see children from the ages of 8 on, and I see all the way through the lifespan of individuals, children and families coping with anxiety and stress. So what I'm going to do before we move to Brittany and to David is I'm going to give you sort of an overview of anxiety. So this means how many children or teens are impacted by anxiety, what is the impact of stress and anxiety on teenagers, and then finally, just what does it look like overall? I know you probably all have experienced it, but I'm going to break it down a little bit more. And then after I get done doing just a brief, I'm not going to talk forever. I don't want to bore you to death. We're just going to give you a little snippet, 10 minutes, and then Brittany's going to talk about how anxiety and stress shows up in girls and what you can do about it as parents. And then David's going to talk about how it shows up in boys and what you can do about it as parents. So we're going to give you kind of some nice, very basic things that you might be able to do at home to help your kids deal with this. So how many teenagers actually have anxiety? So the anxiety and stress are actually synonyms for one another. Anxiety is the fancy word that's usually used in academia, but stress is really just another manifestation of anxiety. And about 10 to 25% of children and teens will meet criteria for an anxiety disorder during their childhood or their teenage years. So this is a very high bar that I'm talking about. 10 to 25% will meet DSM criteria, which means they have an anxiety disorder. That being said, it's even higher when we're talking about subclinical levels, and I can't give you a number because it's experienced so widely by kids a lot of times. And when we say subclinical, it means they may not meet a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder, but it's still fairly stressful for them. So what is the impact of anxiety on our children? And it impacts them in multiple domains. Researchers at Duke University studied 1,400 children over 6 years, and what they found out is the kids with anxiety had just as many problems as the kids with ADHD. So people tend to focus on ADHD and the difficulties that kids have with ADHD, and anxiety is often overlooked because a lot of times kids are what we call internalizing, which means they're bottling it all up. And sometimes we don't see the impact of it until later on, but when researchers actually look at it, they look like they have as significant of problems as kids with ADHD, which this means that the kids with anxiety had higher levels of family discord, problems with peers, and problems at school and academic performance. I think the reason why I have a strong interest in anxiety and stress in children is because just like we used to hear in the 80s that marijuana was the gateway drug to other drugs, anxiety is the gateway disorder to other more serious things. So I feel like it's really an opportunity for us as professionals and as adults to try to do something early on so the kids aren't going down a more serious path. And when I say that, what we found is that anxiety in teenage years predicts worse things in adult years, such as major depression, substance abuse, and other more serious mental health issues. So I feel like as mental health professionals, as parents, as school professionals, this is really an area where we can intervene early on and really make a difference and change kids' trajectory. I'm not saying every kid that has anxiety is going to end up going down that road, but I'm saying it's an opportunity for us to make sure that they do not. So now I'm going to talk about what anxiety looks like. So the other thing I'm going to say, now that I told you all the scary stuff, right, is that anxiety is very treatable. It is the most treatable of all the different mental health issues that come through the door. So this is why I think it's so important that we intervene early, because we can treat it. And anxiety is not necessarily bad. So anxiety is an emotion, and it's here for a reason, and it serves a purpose. So what purpose do you think anxiety and stress is? What's the purpose of it? Anyone? Nobody wants to be brave? Okay.
I would say it elevates your sense of awareness of your surroundings.
Yeah, it elevates your sense of awareness of surroundings. Why would that be important?
To protect yourself.
To protect yourself, right? That's the main purpose of anxiety, is for protection. So it's there for a reason and it serves a purpose. And if we didn't have anxiety, what happens when people have really low anxiety? What's the relationship with performance? Any performance. I'm talking about performance in sports, performance in school, performance in social relationships. What happens when anxiety is too high with performance? So we're not saying get rid of anxiety. What we're saying is let's try to get it to the optimal level. let's get it at a place where it serves a function and the purpose that it's meant to serve for us as human beings, right? So I'm not saying get rid of it, right? I'm just saying you want to teach your kids a way to cope with it and deal with it in a way that they can use that's functional for them. So anxiety has 3 components: physical, cognitive, and behavioral. So the physical components are probably something you're all aware of, right? I have a stomach ache, I don't want to go to school. Probably because I have a test that day, and they're not faking, right? So that it impacts the GI system. It's correlated headaches or another. And then when it's really intense, kids or teenagers can have what we call a panic attack, where it's so intense that their heart is racing and they feel like they're choking and they feel like they're going to die. So there's a lot of physical ways that it can manifest itself. Then there's the cognitive component, which usually comes out as worry. And usually, typically, the question that's being asked, and this is how you know someone's worrying, is what if? What if I fail the test? What if Susie doesn't sit next to me at lunch tomorrow? What if, what if, what if? That's the cognitive component of anxiety or stress. And then finally is the behavioral component, which you've all heard, fight, or what? Right? There's one more. Does anyone know it?
Freeze.
Yes, Grace, that's awesome that you got that. A lot of people don't get the freeze component. So the freeze component is basically, fight is actually face that whatever it is that I'm scared of. Flight is let's just get out of here and not do anything about it. And freeze is just do nothing. So those are made the way that people, all of us as human beings, respond to anxiety. Those are the 3 behavioral ways we might respond. So that's a basic overview of anxiety, the impact that it can have, and then also how many children it actually impacts. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brittany, and I'm going to have her talk about it more specifically and how it shows up in girls, and maybe some little points or some tips on how you as parents can deal with it.
And I'm going to start by standing, and then I'm going to sit down afterwards. So I'm Brittany Bolden. I am a marriage and family therapist at the Family Institute. I graduated from Northwestern's marriage and family therapy program. I'm on staff now. I work downtown, and I work in Evanston, and my primary clinical caseload consists of a lot of adopted teens and children, trauma, which comes in a lot of forms of anxiety, so people that are dealing with PTSD or different forms of childhood trauma, and a lot of multicultural families. So I want to preface this portion by saying that although I'm going to be talking about girls, this is just generalizations, and this does not mean by any means that some of these symptoms would not show up in a teenage boy. So we're just kind of making generalizations here, but we're not saying this would never happen to a teenage boy. So these can kind of go both ways. So what I'm going to start off by saying is that by adulthood, emotional disorders happen 2 times as likely in women than in men. And so a lot of this starts happening by your teenage years. So I don't know, if you guys were to sit here and if I would ask you guys to raise your hands, how many of you are here for a daughter? But my guess would be there's more parents of daughters here than there are of males. And a big portion, a reason of that is that females by adulthood do end up being diagnosed more often than males. One big thing that I want to kind of put your attention to is by the time you reach high school, a big thing that our high school girls experience are anxiety around dating, relationships, friendships. We kind of just have that ingrained emotional attunement, and that actually causes us to be a little bit more stressed about our relationships and our friendships. Does she like me, or does he like me? And I said this kind of weird thing in front of him, and now I'm wondering if they're going to want to be friends with me. So really paying attention to how your daughters respond to relationships, not only just their friendships, but also with teachers, worrying that a teacher doesn't like them, and seeing is that kind of off base, or is there really any evidence that your teacher doesn't like you? So really paying attention to their relationships and how they're responding to that. One thing I want to backtrack, kind of as Danielle was saying, anxiety is a normal thing. And I often tell my clients, animals have anxiety. If you think of a gazelle that's about to be attacked, they're gonna fight or flight, or possum that, they think they fall asleep or freeze, they do the freeze action. So this is something that is ingrained in all animals, but humans with our kind of heightened intelligence, we tend to process things on a deeper level. And so then we have more anxiety that's kind of out of proportion to the situations that are presented to us. Another thing that a lot of children or teenage girls at this age tend to worry about are academics, worrying about getting into college. So an example that I see come up a lot with my teenage girls that are struggling with anxiety is maybe there's a big test. They could be a freshman or sophomore. They're worried about failing this one test and that one test impacting whether or not they'll be able to get in college. And so, yes, your grades are important, obviously, but to think that if I fail my algebra final, or if I get a C, it's usually not even worst case scenario. If I get a C on my algebra final, I will probably not be able to get into the college of my choice. And so kind of being able to help your daughter see that A does not equal Z. And while it is great that you are concerned about your grades, I don't know if not doing an A-level grade on this test is going to equal you not being able to get in college. Another thing that comes up with a lot of my teenage girls is around body image and just how they present. So a lot of girls, they'll enter college, if they haven't already, they're starting to go through puberty and being able to look at what are the standards of beauty. Am I attractive? I have bigger hips, I have smaller hips, I have bigger boobs, I have smaller boobs, whatever is in at the time, somehow they don't fit it. And I'd say that type of anxiety kind of goes across developmental stages. I'm sure us women know that there's always some standard being pushed on us that doesn't quite fit with our body type. And so some of that is normal, I guess is what I'm saying, but when it becomes something you're obsessing about it, you're noticing your daughter is standing in the mirror for hours criticizing her body. Well, look at this. If I could just lose 2 more pounds, if I could just Mom, can I get a surgery? If I can get my breast implants, then I will be as attractive as I need to be. So again, it's about, is it within the range of normalcy? I think we all critique our bodies in some ways, but we have to kind of assess for our daughters, is this, just kind of normal childhood, worrying about your body, or is it beyond that? Another thing that comes up, and I have a special interest in athletics, so a lot of our teenage girls, and I would say teenage boys too, tend to experience a lot of anxiety, performance anxiety around, I have to do really well. I want to play collegiate level sports. Last game, I missed that final shot. There's no way the person that was at my game that I wanted to go to, the school that I want to go to, there's no way they're going to give me a call now because I missed that one shot. So that performance anxiety can impact their academic. They're so worried about their sports that they're not even able to focus while they're in school. So again, being able to kind of hone that in for your daughters and help give them perspective, that's the biggest thing that I'm always preaching with my clients is we got to keep things in perspective. So if you have one bad game, that doesn't equal that your chances to play in college are completely ruined and over. Another thing, let's see. So we talked about dating, relationships, academics, which they've mentioned the resources that they have here, body image. Those are kind of the main things that I see coming up. And so next thing I kind of want to talk about are some of the things to look out for. So I know you guys have paper, pen. So if any of these kind of resonate with you, things that you've seen, just kind of jot it down just to see like, is this something that maybe I should pay a little bit more attention to? So some of the things to look for in your daughters are changes in sleep patterns. So if you typically had a child that sleeps pretty well and then suddenly you notice, wow, she's staying up pretty late or she's not able to fall asleep, and that's not related to them being on Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, or just talking to friends or talking to their boyfriend. If they truly like, Mom, I can't fall asleep, I'm restless, I'm waking up, take note of that. And if it's becoming pervasive and it's not just around finals, but it's around any time of the week, any day of the week, nothing special out of the ordinary, that's something to pay attention to. If you start noticing that they're feeling depressed or kind of hopeless, that's something to kind of take note of. Oftentimes depression and anxiety do go together. They're really fun mates. And that, unfortunately, sometimes you'll notice like, oh, my child is depressed and they also seem kind of anxious. That's very likely that could be happening because they do go together pretty well. If you start noticing that your daughter once used to enjoy dancing or doing ballet and suddenly is like, I hate that, I don't want to do it, I would kind of really explore that. A lot of times anxious people become so focused on being the best or focused on what others are thinking of them, that they begin avoiding activities that once brought them pleasure. So just avoiding of anything that once brought them pleasure, and they suddenly are just saying, nope, nope, I don't want to do it, I can't do it. I would talk to them about that, see where that's coming from. It may be that they just lost interest, but oftentimes the anxiety is keeping them away from wanting to be involved in that particular activity. Eating disorders and cutting happens far more often in your daughters than in young males. So that's something that is kind of, I would say, unique to our adolescent girls. Eating disorders come up that can be related to body image. Sometimes it's not even so much body image, but more so a control thing. They have anxiety about different things, and they can control what they can eat, and that kind of helps their anxiety. The cutting, which is often related to depression, but can also go to anxiety. It's kind of this relief of stress. Doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people that don't cut, but for cutters, it's not about, I want it in my life. It often has nothing to do with suicidal ideations. It's more so, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, and this is something that relieves those thoughts that kind of are, causing me a lot of distress. Things that aren't so observable that Danielle kind of already mentioned is if you're noticing that they're having difficulty breathing. A lot of people that have panic attacks will say the first time they had one that they thought they were having a heart attack. I've had several clients that have called an ambulance, gotten to the hospital, and they're kind of just like, you need to relax. And they spend all this money, $1,000 to go to an emergency room and find out, wow, that was a panic attack that was just happening. So it can feel, and it is very serious, but if you notice that, your child is hyperventilating, if they throw up before a performance, they're experiencing pretty high levels of anxiety. Headaches, dizziness, fatigue, those are all things that go with anxiety. The biggest thing that I would say to look out for, and why I preach perspective, keep things in perspective, is the irrational thoughts tend to be a thing that comes up. So it'll be something around, let's see, oh, well, I was talking to the boy, John, and I noticed that he gave me a weird look in the middle of the conversation. I'm pretty sure that he hates me. And it's like, whoa, wait, what? Like, how did you go from he gave you a weird look to he hates you? And so it's kind of that irrational thinking that really doesn't, it's kind of a little bit beyond what the situation presents. That's something that I would want you guys to explore with your daughter. So some of the tips I would say that I have for you guys is help your daughter just name it, what's bothering you. So the first step is sometimes just saying it out loud, like, Mom, Dad, I'm just really worried that I'm not going to be able to get in the college that I really want to go to. And every time I take a test and I don't get an A, I begin seeing that opportunity just going farther and farther away. And sometimes just you being there to listen and help them name it is all that they're really needing. Another thing that you can do is, validate but don't collude. And what I mean by that is, sometimes your kid may say, I really am worried that if I don't make the team this year, my freshman year, that I'm not gonna make it any other years, because once the team is set, that's who they keep on the team the rest of the years. And you can say, that's a real concern. You really want to play basketball, I get that. But don't feed that anxiety and say, well, therefore, if you don't get it, you're just going to have to give up. And that's the end of it. You're going to probably have to just pick chess, because basketball is not going to work out for you. You're going to have to try something else. So don't go along with it and feed that and amplify that anxiety, but validate them, because not being there for them, that's just going to push them farther away from you and say, well, I can't talk to you because you don't understand, which I'm sure you guys have all heard that line at least once. Help them to think about things that are relaxing for them. So sometimes your kid just doesn't want to talk. Not all kids are about talking to their parents. So saying, hey, let's just watch a movie, or let's go for a walk, or let's go shoot some hoops outside, or let's cook a meal together. Figure out something that you can do to just kind of calm their nerves and help them relax and kind of, practice a new skill of, when I am stressed or overwhelmed, I can do this thing to relax. What I often do with my clients is I give them a scenario, but replace themselves in it and put someone else in it. So for instance, with the school situation about failing a test, I'll often say, okay, so your friend Tanya, if she got a C on this test, would you tell her or mention to her that she's probably not going to get into Northwestern? And they'd be like, no, I wouldn't say that. And so I say, okay, so why, if you get a C on the test, you're not going to get into Northwestern, but if Tanya gets a C on the test, yes, she still has a chance. And they'll kind of think about it and they'll say, huh, yeah, I guess that doesn't really make sense. So helping them take a step back and put someone else in the situation, help them think about, well, yeah, that probably wouldn't work out that way. A big thing is be a role model. We all have stress, we all have anxiety, and some of us, we don't deal with the best way. I know that I often don't deal with anxiety the best way, but you have to remember that you have your kids that are kind of watching you and seeing how you deal with your work stress, how you deal with them when they're stressing you out. And if they see you freaking out, not sleeping, being frazzled, they may mimic some of that behavior. So practicing your own good self-care is a big way to influence them and show them, I get it, I know you're stressed out, I get stressed out too, and this is how I often deal with it. Lastly, praise them when they face their fears, when they face their anxiety. Congratulate them, say, I know that you were really worried about that test, or I know that you were really worried about going to talk to your crush and asking her out to the prom with you, but you did it, and it ended up working out. Congratulate them and show them that there are a lot of rewards to facing your fears, and sometimes it doesn't go perfectly, but let them know that you do notice that they are taking the steps to resolve those anxious situations. So now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Hauser, and he's going to talk about anxiety in young men.
Thank you. So my name is David Hauser, and I'm a clinical psychologist at the Family Institute. And so my piece of this presentation is talking about this more with the adolescent male population. That's what I work a lot with in my client base. And so I'll talk briefly. We've talked kind of about different facets of anxiety, what it looks like with males in particular and kind of teenage years, and then kind of what can we do. So the way I like to kind of simply think about anxiety is as a natural response to unknown and change. And I think what's interesting about teenagers is that adolescence is really the second most intense period of change in development. From 0 to 1, you're going to see more growth and change than at any other point in development. And then in these teenage years is really the second most intense period of change. And with that, and so much change happening right now, as a result, I think we tend to see more anxiety in kids this age. What it looks like and is you'll see, especially with kids in high school, academics and performance, it's showing up before a big sporting event or related to performance in sports or theater or music or performance or academics with a test. And like Brittany's saying, what college am I going to? Am I smart enough? Am I going to do well enough on my algebra exam? These kind of things are areas we'll see and hear more about anxiety, or it'll pop up. Then the performance comes, the anxiety, the exam passes, and the anxiety might dip back down. Socially, I think what's interesting as getting to be a therapist and having access to kind of more stories of kids this age is I'm just amazed how much more complicated social life seems today than even when I was in high school, like maybe not all that long ago, but with the nature of social media and how Instagram or Snapchat or all, there's just so much going on so fast, and that I feel like as a result, just hear more about anxiety related to social dynamics because it's complicated. And so there's that. And underlying adolescence, the theory I think most popular amongst developmental psychologists is that what we deal with as people during this period of our life is trying to answer the question, who am I? And that question is fraught with uncertainty, unknown, change, evolution. And so as a result, I think we see a lot of anxiety, stress. I mean, every day, week in, week out, there's just so much going on for kids this age. And as a result, I think we see heightened states of anxiety. So with the male population, what's in particular, I guess loosely what I would say, and this is broad strokes, noticing edginess, irritability, frustration, and definitely anger. And what I'll touch on here just for a moment is that anger in particular tends to be a safer emotion for males to express. And I think the added dynamic with adolescent boys is that at this age, from about 10 on until, well, I'll just say from 10 on, you're dealing with this incredible bind of it's not okay to talk about what you're feeling. And emotions are kind of complicated. There's all of these social messages I'm getting that if I express this, then I'm not going to be accepted by my social group, or if I'm honest with I'm feeling this. And so there's this stigma around emotion with males at this age that really complicates things and makes anxiety maybe more complicated than it needs to be. And with that, so with that stigma piece, I'll transition into kind of what can we do and try to keep it simple because, I mean, we only have 10 minutes here or so, but the most important thing is to have a conversation going with your adolescent boy. And that very much means talking about a lot of things in indirect ways, talking about it through either, maybe they're talking about, there's some researchers that do research on gossip. And what's interesting about the findings about gossip is how much we process our own lives through gossip and talking about others. Now, I'm not saying gossip with your kids, but the point is that talking about things indirectly can be very helpful. And with working with a lot with this population, I find, especially early on, and just trying to prime the pump and get boys talking. I'm talking a lot about fantasy football. I'm talking a lot about video games. I'm talking a lot about social media and going there. And the most important thing is just to have the conversation going and open boys up so that it's okay to talk in general. The idea of processing my internal world is not fraught with danger or risk. And because in so many ways, unfortunately, we socialize our boys to think that's the case. So what I would encourage you to do is just meet whatever band t-shirt your son's wearing or whatever video game they're obsessed with, that meeting them there, getting into their internal process of what's going on in that sphere of their life. Once you get them talking, this whatever's underneath that, the confusion, the worry, the upset, the sadness, if you get them talking, it will surface. But yeah, it's a faith kind of effort going to these kind of topics to feel as though this stuff starts to come to the surface. But I think more than anything, when I think about working with males at this age, just getting them talking in general is the starting point. And then what's pertinent always surfaces. So I'm going to hand things back over to Danielle, and then we'll take some questions.
So I just wanted to let you know that we do have materials at the back of the room if you're interested about the Family Institute in general. We have a sign-up sheet for our tips of the month. So we have a tips of the month that we send out if you're interested. And now I'm going to open up the floor to all of you to see if do you want to say something too? Yeah. Okay.
Danielle is opening up the floor to all of you, but first we just wanted to do a quick and gentle reminder, which is that all of us have personal experiences to some degree with anxiety and stress, as was referenced, that's normal. But we do want everyone to keep in mind as we engage in the interactive discussion that this is being videotaped, so it will be offered as a webinar publicly. So we just urge that when you frame your questions and engage in conversation, that you bear that in mind.
Yeah.
All right.
So does anyone have some questions?
Oh, I don't have it on the weekend.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask if you had some books to suggest reading in parenting in terms of how to parent through anxiety and stress.
We're giving them a minute to think about it.
Maybe you could send suggestions.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
As they're percolating some thoughts on that, it's also something I can make available on the Welcome Center Parent Program site as they get a chance to digest that question and think of resources. So I'll make those available on our webpage. And if any come to you as we're going, you can also share them then.
One that comes to mind is Dan Siegel has done a lot of great work, and I think his most recent book, he's done a fan talk in the community here, and he's out at UCLA, and I think he has some teenage kids now, but he's done some work in particular. I think he's great. But it was a very good question, a very fair one. Yeah, maybe we can compile a list.
Yeah.
Yes, if you can talk loud enough, you can speak, but we got a mic coming as well.
This one's a little loud, so.
Okay.
So do you have advice on how to deal with school avoidance?
School. Here,
Yes, get them back to school as soon as possible. Well, the reason I say that is the longer they stay out of school, the worse it gets. And so the treatment for school avoidance is always trying to get them back in school as soon as possible. Even if they're just going to school and sitting in the nurse's office, the idea is that they're back in school. So even if you have to coax them into it, you're like, you don't have to go to your classes today. You're gonna, you'd wanna liaison with the school, make sure it was okay with them, and say, you know what, I've talked to the school, you're gonna be in the school nurse's office, and then you're gonna have some time with Mrs. Such and Such social worker, and see, then they at school will start working on it, but at least get them through the door, because the longer they stay at home, that's an avoidance. Avoidance maintains anxiety, the worse it gets. So the longer the days they miss, the higher the anxiety gets about going back, and the more difficult it's going to be for you and for your kid. It's hard to get them to go, but if you can just say, I know you're really stressed about school, but we're going to take this easy, so we're going to get you to the school nurse, and then you can work with the school on a plan of how to kind of step it up each day that feels safe to your kid, but you got to get them through the door any way you can, and you can work with the school on that.
So I have a follow-up question because I brought up.
Yeah.
How do you do with homework avoidance?
Can you repeat the question?
She wants to know how you deal with homework avoidance. So homework avoidance is a little bit more difficult, I would say, because that means there's no easy answer to that. Like the school avoidance, you can liaison with the school. With homework avoidance, I would say you have to try to start to figure out. I mean, you can work with school on that too. There are things they can do to help you. But you need to figure out what it is that's causing them to avoid the homework. Is it that I feel like a lot of times my kids will say, it's that there's so much I'm afraid I'm not going to get it all done. Like, what's the anxiety really about? Is it about getting the homework done? They feel like there's too much, they're not going to finish it. Is it that they feel like they're going to do a bad job, so they avoid doing it? And I would see if they're at the point where they're avoiding homework a lot, that you probably need to get them in to see someone to help you manage that, because a lot of times what happens with parents and homework avoidance is it just becomes a big battle and everybody just wants to rip their hair out. Mom wants to rip her hair out, dad wants to rip his hair out, the kid's mad, having meltdowns, and it's just this big, huge drama. So I think if you can take yourself out of the drama, that'll be better for you. And also getting a tutor, because sometimes they won't have the same reaction to a tutor, right? Because mom's always gonna love me, so I can just totally scream and yell at her, right? But I'm probably not going to be that crappy to a tutor, right? So, I mean, it depends on where it's at and how bad it is, which route you go. So I would say first step, get a tutor, take yourself out of it. So take yourself out of the battle. And then I would say try to have a conversation when they're not doing homework and they're calm, like on a Saturday, and you're having a good time. Just say, hey, what's this about? And then you try to figure it out. And at that point, you've done the tutor, you've talked to schools tried to help you, and it's still going on. I would say you need to go see a professional to help you figure out and to help your kid figure out what it's about. Because it's probably about performance-related stuff, but it can be about other things as well. And it's hard for a parent to really figure that out by themselves when it gets to a certain point. And the battle will just make you go crazy.
Yeah. I mean, and what I would add to that is just that at this age in particular, there's such a battle for you're wanting your kids to take on more of the responsibility and autonomy. What, you're in 10th grade, you're gonna have to do this by yourself, and your freshman year's not that far away. But what happens, like you're saying, it turns into a control issue when it's parents
Right.
and kids, gets away from even the idea of like, all right, you're gonna bump up your efficacy on this. And so to echo that, the more I think you can pull yourself out of that triangle and get a tutor especially, or supports into place that are helping, because in that relationship, there's just, they have to step up their game a little bit.
Mhm.
Yes.
In addition to all the regular adolescent stuff, there's so much in the news these days that is justifiably anxiety producing.
Mhm.
How do you help your kids deal with some of this really troubling stuff that we're hearing about?
So I imagine you're talking a lot about the violence, terrorism, all the different threats that are going on. I think we can all agree that there's some anxiety in all of us about those things. To think that we can go to a movie theater, a grocery store, anywhere, a public place, and possibly be harmed is anxiety provoking for all of us. I think having honest conversations about their risks in life, and a lot of these risks we can't really predict. We can't predict that, you know, if we go to the movies this weekend, that something bad may happen. And I think a lot of it becomes talking about not avoiding the things that you would naturally do. So I think people that have high levels of anxiety could turn to, well, I'm just gonna stay at home now. I'm not gonna go out. Everything feels just too risky. So I think a key thing is continue doing the things that you would normally do. Continue going to the movies, continue going grocery shopping, continue hanging out with your friends, but also having very honest conversations with your child about safety. Don't be out by yourself late at night riding the CTA. You know, don't go somewhere where you're not going to know someone. The obvious things to protect themselves from anything that may happen, but these kind of out of the ordinary events that are occurring, yes, I think that's what I would say is normal anxiety to have. I don't know if any of you want to add to that.
I mean, the only other thing I would say is it's so hard to balance trying to get a realistic appraisal of the world today and having like a healthy relationship with the media where you're not taking too much of this in. And that the media, maybe more than ever in my lifetime, is so primed to just flood you with anxiety because it's good for their business. And it's such a choice of trying to consume the realistic happenings around you in a way that's healthy for you without dismissing it at the same time. But I mean, it's a tough thing to scaffold. So.
I was just going to add that I've had quite a few clients that have brought up this question, and oftentimes I'll tell them, turn off the news. I myself don't watch the news, and I like to stay up to date. I'm more of a reader in general, but I will kind of pick and choose the type of things that I want to read about. And so some of it is like, you know, if you have that in your face, this baby was murdered this weekend. It's just like, oh my God, how can we not as parents react to that with some level of anxiety, especially when it happens in your own community? So getting an idea of if there's a particular news station that you do kind of like and does provide okay news for you, only watching that. But I've told quite a few families, do not let your anxious child watch news, or don't watch these type of crime shows. And it's helped out a lot and just kind of turned it off.
Two questions. Just want to say on that point, both in the middle school and in the high school, the kids all get a daily news 20 minutes or whatever it is. And so they're seeing it at school too.
Yeah.
My question, however, is how any tips on how to get your child to go to sleep when they don't have sleep problems, but choose to like not sleep or stay up?
You mean they're doing more interesting things? Well, I would say if you feel comfortable with it and it's within your range and values as a parent, that you can take away their electronics before they go to bed and have that be a rule, right? No electronics. And once you're in bed, the iPad, iPhone, all electronics are taken out of your room, if you feel comfortable with that as a parent. But I guess it depends on what they're doing to keep them awake and entertained, right? And then maybe having a discussion with them about Do you, have you noticed? See, if you say, I want you to go to bed, right? If mom or dad comes down and is like, you need to go to bed because it's not good for your health. They're adolescents, they're gonna reject that. So having an open conversation, that's the way they are, right? Even you say it's good for them, they're like, whatever. So I think you have to approach it from the way of, noticing when not sleeping has a negative consequence on them and observing that to them in a non-judgmental way. Not, I told you so. Like, I noticed you didn't sleep last night and it seems like, you just told me about your day at school and it sounds like it was sort of a stressful day and now you seem like you're kind of not in the best of moods. I wonder if that's because, you didn't sleep a whole lot last night. It's sort of like you just kind of feed it to them a little bit because you need them to get committed to wanting to sleep, because for them to practice good sleep hygiene to some degree, they have to be committed to it, right? They can't, because you can control certain things like taking all the electronics out, but who knows how they're entertaining themselves. They're sitting there thinking about their day, they're picking out their outfits for the next day, they're reading a book, they can find a lot of ways to entertain themselves even without electronics. So then it's like getting buy-in to sleeping enough is important to you, not just because the doctor said so or mom said so, but these are the reasons why, and kind of connecting that together for them. And then if they have buy-in, then you can start talking about, these are the things you do to have good sleep hygiene. All you do in bed is sleep. You don't do anything else in bed. You don't do your homework in bed. You don't, text on your phone and play video games in your bed. Your bed is just for sleep. You don't, have screens an hour before bed. You have a pretty typical bedtime, right? Because your sleep hygiene is you go to bed at relatively the same time every night and only vary it by 2 hours on the weekend. We'll say 3 hours for them because they're teenagers and, but teaching them about sleep hygiene and how that's connected. And the biggest thing is, if you know something's important to them, sleep probably does connect to it in some way, but drawing that link. Hey, you really want to be the best basketball player ever? Guess what? You need sleep. You really want to do well in school? Guess what? You need sleep. See, because you got to find out, you have to make sleep be something that they're interested in, that's important. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I have a question.
How much of stress and anxiety is heritable, that it comes through like genetic components, like you come from just a grandma was stressy and mom is stressy and now I'm stressy, etc. And then I guess my second question on that is, there's the genetic component, but then more the behavioral component, which is that if grandma is always kind of freaking and then mom is always freaking, then the behavior, and we'll put dads in there too, grandpa and dad, not just the women.
So with anxiety, there is a large genetic component to it. Somewhere within the range of 50% is due to genetics. So, a lot of these kids, they earned it. I always say they earned it honestly, right? They couldn't really help it. They had it right out the gate, right? So stop beating yourself up so much. It was going to be there no matter what, on one hand. On the other hand, there is an environmental component, is the other part of it, a strong part of it too. And the environment is more than just your family, right? It's their peers, it's their school system, it's also the family. So all of these things sort of coalesce together to create an environment that's more likely to create stress and anxiety. I can say from my experience of being a therapist on the North Shore now for 10 years, the North Shore is like a little pressure cooker. Mm-hmm. And they, even if you in your own home are sending them the best messages that you possibly can, they are seeing it somewhere in their community, either through their peers, the success of the people they see around them. And so it's hard to control all aspects of the environment, but you can send messages to them. You can try to model coping to them. So you yourself talking about having anxiety and then talking to them about how you handle difficult times, right? These all can kind of damper this down a little bit. But sometimes part of it is they just have it. And as parents, I think in professionals, what we need to do is help them learn ways to manage and cope with it.
Here, that.
My child tends to sometimes have anxiety in class when she feels like she really wants to learn and she enjoys learning, and her teachers have all recognized that. However, sometimes she feels like some of the groups she's working in are going too fast for her. And she starts getting really stressed and anxious about it. And she says she's on the verge of tears. And so, you know, you can go and talk to somebody. You can go down to talk to the psychologist and social worker. She goes, but if I leave class, then I'm going to get even more stressed and more anxious about it. So she's like, I don't have time to do that. So, you know, how can I help her with that?
That seems like a question
Yeah,
for,
I mean,
the
Ty, do you want to try and field some of how that looks at ETHS and then?
Sure. So I was going to say, I think this is part of that. Part of the question is, how do we help kids maintain and manage the anxiety when they're in class? Because our goal is to keep them in class. And so I will let the panelists kind of respond to that question, and particularly because we know anxiety is a lot of internalizing, and we really try to support and help students engage in that self-talk and those positive replacement thoughts so that we can help them sustain within class. However, we always want students to know, because this is part of managing anxiety, that they have exit strategies and that they always have options, because the more they feel like they have control over the scenario, the better that their outcome is going to be. So encouraging anyone's child to know that if you're feeling that level of stress, that you can ask to go to the bathroom. You want to interrupt that kind of cycle that they're starting to engage in. That they can ask to go to get a drink of water. That we can coordinate if they express these things to their counselor or social worker, that we can work actively, even if a particular class is a trigger for them. We can work actively with that teacher to say, okay, so here's the deal. If she asks to go to the bathroom, it's because she actually needs to interrupt this cycle, and we engage in that a lot. And there are other, obviously, exit strategies, including asking to be able to go to the social worker, to the counselor, and get those other supports actively within that environment before things escalate further. Did you guys want to answer?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, if I had a client that expressed something like that, I would first tap into reaching out to the school and saying, what are the resources? Who should this parent and child reach out to? I imagine you would tell them, the dean or the social worker, whoever that person.
The social worker, counselor.
Right, and if accommodations are needed, like a different classroom, seeing like, is this level of class, is that, you know, the problem? And just kind of, you know, problem shooting with you and your daughter and figuring out, you know, what the issue is, and seeing if you can solve it on that level. That's kind of what I would do.
Just one more thing in the neighborhood of that is, I think such an important task to try to encourage high schoolers is self-advocacy. And so, and that piece of literally, what does the sequence look like of you going to your teacher to ask for this, which is a big deal at this age. It's like teachers take on a very kind of particular projection, I think, for teenagers. And so trying and really walking through what does it look like in small ways to advocate, because so much about anxiety is gradually approaching things, and the more you expose yourself, the more you realize how much power you do have. So.
Thank you.
Good.
I know there were a couple other hands.
I think we had some questions in the back. Want to make sure that folks.
Arlene, did you still have a question?
I'm wondering if you have some specific tips for the student. I know you said this is perspective, but let's say they won't get into the college if they fail that test, then they won't get the athletic scholarship or whatever. So when there's a lot of pressure, a lot of courses that they're working on, what tips do you have just to make it through the week as it builds?
I think that's a really good question, and I don't think there's an easy answer, but I mean, if it's to the point where you know this particular test is going to have a significant yes/no impact on a college or this game, I think it's so much about preparation going into that, and really the expectation is known that this is a very, very big event, and so that is the emotional experience of kind of processing that level going up to it isn't all packed into the final few days right before it, but this is something that's being talked about fluidly for ideally like weeks going into it, so then it's not such a loaded, impacted kind of event, but something that's maybe a little bit more fleshed out over time. I'm sure that's not fully getting at your question.
I think the other thing that I think of is we've all experienced something that hasn't been worked out the way that we want it to. And part of resiliency is how we respond to adverse situations. And so I don't want you guys to feel as though we have to paint this fantasy picture that everything you've always wanted is all going to work out perfectly if you just do what you're supposed to. Because there's plenty of us that studied hard or worked hard or didn't get the promotion that we wanted or didn't get into the school that we wanted. That's life. You know, so I think to add on to what David is saying is you prepare, but you also explore other options. If they're wanting to go to Harvard, but they don't get in, well, then it becomes exploring, what are you wanting to study? What is your end goal here? What do you want to attain? I often explore the meaning. What did it mean to you to be able to get into Harvard? And to not get in there, does that mean that you're dumb? So exploring what they've decided it means for them to not attain something. That you're not athletic is because you didn't make that basketball team, you're not gifted. Because a lot of times they have this narrative going in their head that's not quite accurate. So if they want to be a doctor but didn't get into Harvard, they can still become a doctor. It just might be that they go to a different school, and often that experience of not getting there builds their resiliency and helps them have a story in which they can talk about how they bounced back to a situation that didn't work out the way they wanted it to.
I would add that at ETHS, one of the things we want to do is actually build that resilience for students while they're in high school, before they move on to whatever post-secondary plans that life holds for them, whether that's college, programming, the world of work. We want them to learn how to recover from those levels of life's challenges and frustrations. And I see your hand in the front, and we got 2 more questions here, and then I'll move to the front.
Hi, what do you do when a male child refuses to talk other than a few yes or no's and then complete silence? And then also I want to add, not willing to talk with therapists or someone else he doesn't know.
Sure. I mean, and you got a lot of kind of chuckles at that because I think that is a common experience. And that is a difficult one. All I would suggest, I'd suggest 2 things. And one is being hyper observant of meeting them where they're at. And so whatever that looks like, whatever is relevant to them in any way, whether that's a girlfriend, a social group they're in, a team, a game, anything of that nature, starting with what's there and just getting them to talk about that. And the process is just getting them talking in general. Be patient and it will come, but it's meeting them there. But so much about this is a very gradual process. And I would say so much about what adult life as parents is so fast moving that it is hard to slow down to the pace often that I think is most useful for extracting more of this out. And I think in a lot of ways that's what's so kind of in a way makes our jobs easier is it's 1 hour a week that's built in that you just do this and you talk. And so then we're kind of already in an environment where you can talk. But as far as getting them into therapy, I mean that you're talking about trust and you're talking about feeling safe enough to share, and that stuff takes a lot of time to establish.
Yeah.
What is a family?
That's good.
Suggestion of you're talking as a family.
Yeah.
So. Oh, we got one, yeah.
I was just going to add on to that. I think you guys can probably all remember when your kids were toddler age, and we call it kind of parallel play. So they would kind of you'd be doing one activity, but kind of talking to them while they're doing that. I suggest that to parents for their adolescents. So it could be we're watching a movie and you see a guy that's cheating on a girl and they're like, what? It's crazy that you know that. What do you think about that? You know, so trying to getting to remove it a little bit and trying to help them have conversations about things. And it's like, it's not about them, but you're helping convince them to talk about situations that may apply to their own lives. So using different things, maybe that's not them, because they're gonna be like, Mom, why are you in my business? I don't wanna talk to you. But when you're talking about the scandal character and the president sleeping with that woman, then it's like, that's not me, but I think that's kind of messed up, or she's kind of dumb to do that. You can kind of get an idea of what their thinking is around those things. So I often say use an activity to kind of promote conversation, and then, go from there, because they might not want to sit down at dinner and have a formal conversation with you.
In that spirit, there's actually been some research on the idea that males in general talk better on long car trips. And it's the idea of having a distraction that kind of, it's rare to come across periods in life where you're not distracted and there's not much of a goal. And that, but take that, the driving, but take that for what it's worth.
I think it's rare a lot of times that if you approach it too directly, whether you're talking about girls or boys, that they're going to want to sit down and have a deep conversation with you. But usually what you're looking for is you're always looking for an end, whatever that is. And I can say that the best thing to do, and David and Brittany both touched on this, is to pay attention to them and show them that you're paying attention to them and that you care about what they care about. And then trying to weave it in different ways, like the way Brittany said, because a lot of times if you're like, we need to have a talk, they're like, they're immediately like, this seems bad and awful and I don't want to do this. But also I think you said it in the front row, she said family talk. Well, I think if you have a family night that you've established, that you as a family all do something together, and it could be we all watch a movie or we all do something, where you have an opportunity as a family, right, no matter what developmental ages they are. This is our thing, this is our ritual, this is what we do together. That gives some fertile ground for possibilities to observe their behavior, get an understanding of what's important to them, and maybe gives you an in at different times. So that's what you're always looking for, is the in. Where's my in as a parent to kind of talk to them about the things that I want to talk to them about or I'm concerned about.
Thank you. I know we have many questions, so we have the one back here up front, and I'll be moving him back again.
Thank you. Taya, this might go to you, this question. I'm wondering the extent to which faculty are on board with what we're talking about here, the extent to which it's discussed at faculty level. I asked the question with a great appreciation for all that's offered at ETHS, but also with a sense that oftentimes, at least in my family's experience, there's a little bit of a disconnect between this theme and the expectations of some teachers in terms of homework, for example.
So I'll try to be brief about that question, but I would say that, as you know, we have a variety of services, whether they're individual, group, et cetera, to be able to support students. But social emotional learning is one of the state learning standards that we have, and we've continued to try to incorporate that more school-wide. There's actual dedication in terms of professional development this year to a social emotional learning module in terms of supporting staff about how to incorporate social emotional learning naturally within the classroom setting. And we've had many, many years in academia where we've considered academics to be very separate from social emotional and behavioral learning, but we now know that they're all kind of inextricably linked. So we are continuing to grow our professional development around these elements and to continue to support our teaching staff and all staff, actually school-wide, because that needs to be something at a universal level, from our safety staff when you walk in the door, to our support staff, to our teaching staff. So we're always interested in hearing feedback, but there is a strong commitment. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. I know you had your hand up.
I think I'm going to ask the same question in a slightly different way. I wonder to what extent faculty are asked to look at their classes here and how anxiety-provoking they are, because I feel like I have a child who takes school very seriously, not because he's looking at the grade, but because he
just wants to do well. And I feel like sometimes when children here, or teenagers here, sign up for certain classes, you've signed up for a certain degree of anxiety, it's just assumed. And I don't really understand why intellectual challenge and anxiety need to go hand in hand. And so I wonder, is there any evaluation of that going on in school?
That's a great question. And when you're talking about level of classes or rigor, and rigor is an individual experience, right? That for every student may be experiencing at different levels. But one thing that we are continuing to look at is what patterns of experiences do students have in varied classes? What happens even with regard to when we're talking about AP classes or any level of class? What is the student experience? And I think we're increasingly trying to really focus on what's happening in terms of that patterning in varied classes. So yes, I'm glad that you brought that up so that we could highlight that. And any concerns that come up, absolutely feel free to reach out to the department chair, feel free to reach out to me as well, because these are ongoing conversations that we want to make sure to catch those patterns and be able to shift our culture around the anxiety. Thank you. Right back here.
And Taya, if I might, I think we can take maybe 3 or 4 more questions. That's not because we're going to end our evening.
That's just merely because we've imagined that some of you might have some other, time for conversation or maybe a specific question. We want to be respectful of us being done and out of the building as soon as we possibly can. So trying to get at least the next couple of questions if possible.
Just a quick question about how do you know when to go to that next level and it's just not normal teenage angst and you really do need to seek professional help or professional services? That was one question. And then some people were saying about kids that don't necessarily talk. I found that if I find that cool cousin or that cool aunt or uncle, that they can usually get more out of them than parents.
Psychological espionage, I love it.
But yeah, just how do you know when it's just normal, you just leave it alone versus you probably need to let you see someone.
How I kind of always assess this thing is it impacting a level of functioning in a big area of their life? So I have clients right now that the child isn't sleeping to the point that they wake up their parents every night and the parent is having to come sleep in their room for several hours each night. Now the parents are ending up being late for work because they're coming into the room. The woman that brought up the child that's avoiding going to school at all. So that has pretty big ramifications if you don't attend school at all. The biggest thing that I would say that I look for is there real reason? So there's a big test coming up, I have to take the SAT. Of course they're gonna feel anxious, or the ACT. But if it kind of goes beyond that every week, turning in a homework assignment, if I don't get 100% of this one homework assignment, that's worth 10 points. Okay, that's when I say it doesn't really fit with that situation, that level of anxiety. If they're having the level of anxiety for ACT that they do for a 10-point math homework assignment, then I would say that's when it's kind of getting out of whack and it's no longer fitting the situation. So if it's impacting, their ability to their health, their sleep, being able to attend school, avoiding friendships, that's when I say you might want to contact and get some extra help.
I think the worst thing that can happen is you take them to a professional. I know at least the way we work, right, at the Family Institute is we don't ever want to over-therapize someone more than necessary. So I've had sessions that parents have brought the kid in and I did 4 sessions, boom, we were done. So worst case scenario is you take them to a professional and it's really not that big of a deal. They should be out of the door in 2 sessions or 3 sessions where you teach some basic stress management skills. And if it's not really that bad, they're going to grasp onto that fairly quickly and they're done. Because, for us as therapists, no, we don't want to have, I hate nothing more than I'm sitting there talking about chit chat with one of my teenagers. I'm like, I'm here to work, here to do work, right? And so once they're better, it's like, bye-bye, okay, time to go, right? So I think if there's a question in your head, and you really kind of have it, not a floating question, but you kind of think it a couple times, I would say take them to someone, because anybody who's honest and well-trained in this field is going to do an honest assessment and say, hey, I think this is probably the amount of time that it would take me to work. I mean, sometimes I can tell, I've been doing this long enough that I can almost tell how long it's gonna take me. Not always, because sometimes you never know what you're getting into, but if sometimes it's taken me 4 sessions, sometimes 6 sessions, it doesn't have to be this long drawn out thing. So I think if you feel like, I'm not sure if I need someone, and you have that thought more than once, I would say go to a professional, because in my mind, like I said before, you want to nip it in the bud, because this is something that if they learn coping skills and they learn it early on, you nipped it in the bud, it's not going to end up being anything else. But if you kind of let it go and they don't kind of learn those skills, then it could end up kind of blooming into something else more serious. And I would say you probably don't want to get to that point. Just better safe than sorry is what I would say.
I will take
Right.
a
And
two,
give one.
two, one, two.
She's up in the corner.
Okay. Yes, so we're gauging time because we want to respect everyone's time here, yet we want to respect everyone's voices and questions. So we're going to take 2 more questions. And I know some of you have had your hands raised, so we're going to sort of.
So this will be fairly quick because it's kind of a reflection. One is for the parent who asked about sleep and phones in particular. There is technology that will fix this problem for you and make you not have to take the phone away. And I'll give it to you guys, you can post it. But you guys, between smart limits from AT&T and the ability to do the same thing for your Wi-Fi, you can make the phone and the iPad die at a certain time. So just know that. And the second reflection, I also teach at Northwestern, not in psychology, but all of these high-performing kids come to us with mistaken notion that hard work alone is what gets you great results, and they're wrong. There is a huge value to playfulness. There is a huge value to trying a bunch of stuff and not having it work. And I think we need to stop telling kids that there's one path to success. There are many, many paths. So that's just a reflection. That's good.
No, thank you. That's a great reflection on the whole person for each of us, as well as our students, since we model that for our children. All right, I'm sorry. I know we have a couple more. Do we have time since that was quick?
2, okay, 2.
2, since that wasn't a question.
You just gave somebody some time.
Quick question about texting. When I receive a text during the day, my inclination is not to answer it because it's usually not necessarily lunchtime. And one of my daughters today was the one who doesn't text a lot, gave me a huge one about a class, a grade, or this or that. I'm about to cry. And it just, affected my day too, up to the end. And then when I picked her up, everything was fine. That's crazy. It's a big deal, I don't know how seriously to take things sometimes, or, what's this just, or this isn't just a matter of turning it on and off, Mom. And then also the fact of getting into these conversations while texting, I can't stand. So it's just getting heated, and I hate the whole physical thing of it. I'd much rather talk, but that's, harder to do basically. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of it, based on what you're talking about, is just the physiological, actual, how long emotion lasts, and just getting into that. And so your experience of at 12 o'clock, this seemed like an absolute crisis, and then you're wrapped with that feeling, or take some of that on, and then by the end of the day, what are you talking about? I mean, different, but to that, I guess it's a little bit away from texting, but just having the conversation about just even how emotion does pass and not getting too caught up in that. As for the texting, I think that's such an interesting question, that what is a healthy relationship with texting, and it just comes in so many different forms. I'm not even sure, are you allowed to text? Is that like
If a student,
hallway.
right, or if a student requested to go to the restroom, they could theoretically text from the restroom. So we don't want to assume that was out of the rules.
We're going to assume it was during lunch.
Right.
It was a positive use of a coping skill, and she trusts you.
probably the most helpful is just kind of reflecting that you heard them and that you'll talk about it.
So you should answer the text. You shouldn't pretend
Yeah.
And I would add probably having a conversation with your student to understand that if they need to text you during the day, to just kind of get out that emotion, that it won't necessarily be a back and forth conversation, that you'll be there and kind of planning that in advance for the future.
Great.
I think we had a question back here.
This might be a little more complicated. I have children who go here who are seniors, and
I'll give it to you.
how does ADHD change into anxiety?
How does ADHD?
So, I don't know, I mean, I think,
I'm male and
sure, you have a.
Yeah, I do, totally, because I deal with this all the time. So I think if I understand the question correctly, but I want to make sure I do, are you saying that one of your children has ADHD, but now two, and now you're starting to see some anxiety?
Right.
I think that's very common with ADHD because the ADHD and the function that ends up happening for them. So for example, a lot of times because it's hard to pay attention, they can miss a lot of social cues and therefore may not understand why somebody has responded to them in a certain way, which can cause anxiety. They can cause anxiety because it does make it more difficult to pay attention in class and get all the information you need. So a lot of times I see a lot of kids have anxiety secondary to the ADHD because it makes their life more difficult. Like it's more difficult to pay attention in school. It's more difficult to pay attention in social situations. And then a lot of the kids I work with that have ADHD, they feel very anxious that other people don't understand ADHD. So I'll have a lot of them say to me, you know, I was spacing out in French class, and then I had to ask my best friend what the teacher said, and then the best friend looks at me like I'm completely stupid because how come I didn't hear what the teacher just said? Well, literally, my client had not heard what the teacher said. And so then she's feeling badly and anxious about herself because now she's worried her best friend that she's annoying her best friend, right? So like the difficulty with attention starts to impact them in different domains, and then they start to feel anxious about those different areas because of that. Typically, but sometimes they can go together too.
Do you feel that ADHD, and my kids were diagnosed in 6th grade, sorry.
Yeah, they were diagnosed.
They were diagnosed in 6th grade.
Yeah.
Can go away and be switched to anxiety?
Interesting question.
This is something that.
No, not if they were diagnosed properly, because ADHD is a brain-based issue, meaning that the brain is just wired differently, and it is that way from the beginning that they were born, but it depends at what point it gets picked up, right? But it's often that anxiety and ADHD share a lot of symptoms in common, and they can get misdiagnosed, where a lot of times I will have people come in and say, I think my kid has anxiety, and their primary issue is ADHD, and or I have somebody who comes in who has ADHD, but maybe they weren't diagnosed properly and they really have anxiety. Or the third option is they have both. So my big stick with ADHD is it should be properly diagnosed, and to properly diagnose it, there really, in my opinion, needs to be a neuropsychological examination where certain.
Yes.
Great,
So-
that's good. So, no, that's good.
So-
It's good that it was, because otherwise it can put people off track for a really long time. But I think most likely you see they're highly comorbid with one another too. You often see them go together.
So I'm going to pause us right there just for a moment because I want to make sure we don't get too drilled down on specifics. And I do also want to respect everyone's time. First of all, I just want to thank you all for attending, and I really appreciate you being here from Family Institute. Your expertise is invaluable. I know there are some people watching from home. No one submitted any questions there, but we appreciate the questions from the audience. We will stick around for a moment, but there are resources that were available. You can sign up for more information. Ms. Kinsey would like to give a quick plug, so if you can listen up for just a sec.
All right, so because we were talking about anxiety and stress, I'm going to introduce one more anxiety-provoking topic, which is financial aid for college. Thursday night, 7 p.m. here at ETHS. We actually have a collaborative because we provide a lot of supports in terms of financial planning for post-secondary programs and colleges. So if anybody would like to alleviate a little bit of their stress, you're welcome, 7 p.m. on Thursday night. And again, thank you all for coming, and thank you to our Family Institute.
We'll see you at our next parent program on February 16th. More information will come via email.